Behind these walls, silence isn't peace. It's survival. Behind these fences, freedom is a memory, and every shadow hides a story no one dares to tell. Welcome to Pelican Bay, one of America's most notorious prisons, a fortress where the most dangerous inmates are held under constant watch, and every day is a battle between control and chaos. You've seen prisons on TV, in movies, in sensationalized headlines. But nothing compares to the reality inside Pelican Bay State Prison. The razor wire, the isolation units, the omnipresent guards, it's more than just a facility. It's a living, breathing world of fear, power, and unthinkable survival. In this documentary, you'll step behind the razor wire and into a reality that most people can't even imagine. You'll hear stories of inmates who've survived unspeakable violence, guards who've faced impossible moral dilemmas, and the invisible rules that govern life inside these walls. And when you think you know what's coming, the truth will shock you. This is not just a prison. This is Pelican Bay. The first thing you notice when you arrive at Pelican Bay isn't the high fences or the cameras mounted on every corner. It's the stillness, the kind of stillness that feels alive, almost oppressive. A place designed to break both body and spirit, where even the smallest sound can echo like a warning. The buses roll in, bringing men from every corner of California, men convicted of crimes the world labels unimaginable. Inside these buses, whispers mix with tension. New arrivals know their lives will never be the same. And for those already inside, each newcomer is a story to watch, a threat to measure, or a potential ally to manipulate. As you step off the bus, the enormity of the place hits you. Towering fences crowned with razor wire stretch as far as the eye can see. Armed guards stand at intervals, scanning every movement, their expressions unreadable. Cameras follow your every step, recording everything, because in Pelican Bay, even a moment of weakness can be fatal. You pass the intake building, where the process of stripping away identity begins. Names are replaced with numbers. Personal belongings vanish. Every item, from a wristwatch to a toothbrush, is catalogued and controlled. The first lesson of Pelican Bay is clear. Here, you are nothing without permission. But it's not just the physical control that defines life here. It's the psychological grip. The constant awareness that every choice, every glance, every word, could spark violence. The inmates learn quickly. Survival isn't just about strength. It's about perception, strategy, and understanding the silent rules of the yard. And then comes the first glimpse of the cells. Small, bare, cold. For some, these walls offer structure. For others, they are a tomb. And somewhere, behind another line of razor wire, men who have lived here for decades watch, calculating, waiting, teaching the newcomers what it truly means to live in a place that doesn't forgive mistakes. This is Pelican Bay, a place where every arrival is tested, every guard is vigilant, and every shadow hides a story. Today, you're about to see some of those stories unfold, stories of loyalty, betrayal, and survival against unimaginable odds. Step into the yard, and the atmosphere changes instantly. The silence of the arrival hall gives way to a low hum, a constant, almost electric energy that runs through the open spaces. Here, every eye is watching, every movement is calculated. Inmates pace like predators, sizing each other up, testing boundaries, establishing dominance. For newcomers, the yard is both a proving ground and a gauntlet. The yard at Pelican Bay isn't just a place to exercise or pass the time. It's a battlefield of influence, reputation, and survival. You quickly learn that the strongest aren't always the biggest, and the loudest aren't always the most dangerous. It's the ones who understand fear, control, and strategy who hold real power. Groups form along invisible lines, families, gangs, alliances built on respect, fear, or necessity. There are those who act as protectors, those who watch for weaknesses, and those who wait for the perfect moment to strike. Even within these groups, betrayal is never far away. A joke misinterpreted, a glance in the wrong direction, a whisper that shouldn't have been heard. In this yard, anything can spiral into chaos. You see men practicing in silence, some lifting weights, some shadowboxing, some pacing like caged animals. But even in these mundane acts, there is an intensity. Every action is measured, every habit a weapon. Because here, the rules aren't written. They're learned through scars, both visible and invisible. Conversations are sparse, and even a simple exchange carries weight. Words are currency, threats are negotiations, and silence can speak louder than screams. To outsiders, it may look like routine. But inside, it's a constant mental chess game. The smallest misstep can turn a routine day into a nightmare. And then there's the violence. It's unpredictable, sudden, and devastating. Fights erupt over trivial slights or deep grudges, and the consequences are permanent. In the yard, the line between predator and prey is razor-thin. Yet, amidst the tension, there is a strange sense of order. An unspoken hierarchy governs interactions, and respect, earned or stolen, is the only currency that matters. New arrivals learn to observe first, speak second, and move third. Survival demands patience, awareness, and sometimes, ruthlessness. This is a world that tests every instinct and strips away everything you thought you knew about human behavior. For the guards, the yard is just as tense. They patrol with precision, eyes scanning, radios crackling with constant updates. They know every shift in body language, every subtle movement. Their presence is a reminder that control is never absolute. And amidst all this tension, the clock ticks. Time passes differently inside Pelican Bay. Minutes stretch into hours, hours into days. Every sunrise is both a relief and a threat. The world outside seems distant, almost unreal, while the prison yard pulses with life, death, and the invisible rules that dictate both. This is life in the yard. A world governed by codes you cannot read unless you live them. A place where every day is a lesson in survival, and every decision carries consequences that reach far beyond the fences. Beyond the yard, beyond the routines and the calculated social games, lies the heart of Pelican Bay Terror, the Security Housing Unit, SHU, the solitary confinement cells that have earned the prison its notorious reputation. Step inside, and the world changes. The clamor of the yard, the tense interactions, the muted chaos, all vanish. Here, there is nothing but silence, shadows, and the mind's own echo. These cells are small, cold, and stripped of anything that might comfort a man. A concrete slab for a bed, a stainless steel toilet and sink, a tiny slit for a window that barely lets in daylight. For 23 hours a day, the doors are locked, and the only interaction is with a guard who walks past like a ghost, carrying food, sometimes a glance, but almost never a word. Inside, time behaves differently. Minutes stretch like hours. Hours stretch into days. Weeks blur into months. The mind, starved of stimuli, begins to fill the void with its own creations, fears, memories, obsessions. The smallest noise becomes deafening. A creaking hinge can trigger a cascade of anxiety. A shadow in the corner can feel like a presence in the room. In the SHU, reality becomes elastic, and every thought is magnified. The men in these cells are not ordinary prisoners. They are the most dangerous, the one society has deemed too extreme for the general population. They arrive with histories of violence and reputations that precede them. But even the toughest are tested here. The SHU is not just punishment. It is a slow, grinding psychological pressure that can break a man, or in some cases, reshape him into something far more dangerous. Guards describe the men in these cells as both silent and menacing. Many won't speak unless spoken to, their words measured and deliberate. Some spend years in isolation, communicating through notes slipped under doors or coded messages in the few minutes they are allowed outside. They form their own hidden networks, a parallel society of whispers and strategy. Psychologists call it sensory deprivation, but the inmates call it reality. The SHU forces men to confront themselves in ways the outside world never could. Every regret, every memory, every buried instinct surfaces. Some emerge broken. Others emerge sharper, more calculated, more dangerous than ever. For those who endure, the world outside the cell becomes almost alien, a place of noise and unpredictability they via learn to despise. Solitude here is not peace. It's a test, a crucible, and for some, a sentence that will never truly end. In Pelican Bay, the SHU is where life becomes a war fought in the mind. And yet, amid this psychological battleground, stories of resilience emerge. Alliances that survive through the smallest gestures, strategies to maintain sanity, and moments of humanity that defy the brutality of the walls. These small victories are everything. This is the SHU, the place where silence screams, where shadows await, and where every second challenges what it means to be human. Among the thousands who pass through Pelican Bay's gates, some names are whispered more than others. One such man, known only by his nickname the Outlaw, arrived on a grey, rain-slicked morning, and his story would soon become legend inside these walls. The Outlaw was not born a legend. He grew up in the underbelly of Los Angeles, a place where loyalty was currency and betrayal could be deadly. His crimes, A series of high-profile robberies and violent confrontations had earned him the label of untouchable on the streets. But Pelican Bay is not the streets. Here, reputation only goes so far. From the moment he stepped off the intake bus, the outlaw sensed the weight of thousands of eyes studying him, measuring him, calculating whether he would survive. Guards escorted him through the intake process, stripping away his name, his possessions, his identity. And then, the first real test, the yard. A place where the hierarchy is invisible, yet unbreakable. Where respect is earned, not demanded. He walked the yard slowly, scanning the groups that had already formed, noting who looked like leaders, who looked like followers, and who seemed unpredictable. Every glance was a negotiation. Every gesture, a statement. He knew he needed allies, but trust was a dangerous gamble. One wrong alliance could mark him for attack, and one wrong word could end him. Within hours, the outlaw had already encountered his first warning. A gang of older inmates, veterans of decades behind bars, approached him. Their presence was a mix of curiosity and intimidation, a silent test of strength. He didn't flinch. He didn't overreact. Instead, he spoke with measured words, making no promises he couldn't keep, acknowledging only the respect he had earned through action. It was a dangerous game, but one he was trained to play. But even the most calculated newcomer cannot escape the inevitable challenges of Pelican Bay. That night, when the yard emptied and the cells fell silent, the outlaw faced the first taste of true isolation. In the SHU, he would confront a darkness unlike any he had ever known, silence so absolute it roared, and a mind that began to betray him. Memories of his crimes, the people he had hurt, and the choices that had led him here surfaced relentlessly. And yet, he knew something that many did not. To survive Pelican Bay, a man must not just endure, he must adapt. The days turned into weeks. The outlaw learned the subtle rules of the yard, which nods signaled respect, which movements could spark conflict. He learned that strength alone was never enough. Intelligence, perception, and timing mattered more than muscle. He learned to watch for the invisible cues, a glance that betrayed fear, a handshake that was more than it seemed, the slightest twitch of a guard's eye that hinted at an impending confrontation. And then came the moment that would define him. In that instant, the outlaw realized something every man in Pelican Bay eventually learns. Fear is contagious, but courage is a weapon. And those who wield it carefully can survive. The outlaw's story was just beginning. And as his legend grew, he would face betrayals that cut deeper than steel and choices that forced him to confront the darkest parts of himself. Inside Pelican Bay, survival was a story written in blood, strategy, and the fragile threads of trust. It started as a whisper, a minor dispute over territory, a misread glance, a comment that seemed innocent but carried weight. In Pelican Bay, even the smallest slight could ignite a storm, and today, the storm found the outlaw. The yard, usually a place of calculated observation, erupted with sudden violence. Two inmates clashed near the basketball court, their shouts cutting through the morning air. Others froze, sensing the tension would ripple through the yard. The outlaw stood at the edge, his eyes scanning the chaos, knowing that one wrong move could turn him from observer to target. The confrontation escalated quickly. Within seconds, punches flew, bodies collided, and the metallic clang of a makeshift weapon echoed off the concrete walls. The yard, already tense, became a battleground. Inmates formed defensive lines, some to protect allies, others to stake their dominance. The outlaw moved deliberately, not rushing into the fray, but not retreating either. Every step, every glance, every breath was part of a strategy honed over years of survival. In the chaos, a gang known for its brutality targeted the outlaw. They saw him as a newcomer with potential, either a threat or a recruit. They advanced, circling like predators, waiting for hesitation. And then, the moment of truth, the outlaw acted. Quick, decisive, and ruthless. He deflected an attack, grabbed an opponent in a maneuver that was both defensive and intimidating, and forced the gang to reconsider. The men around him learned quickly that he was not to be underestimated. The guards arrived soon after, their presence slicing through the frenzy. For the outlaw, the encounter was more than physical, it was psychological. He had passed his first real test, but he also realized that respect came at a high cost, and survival demanded constant vigilance. In the aftermath, the yard became a theater of silent calculations. Alliances shifted overnight. Men who had once ignored the outlaw now observed him closely. Some sought his protection, others his downfall. The subtle dance of power inside Pelican Bay had intensified, and he understood something essential. In this prison, A single act could elevate a man to legend or condemn him to ruin. That night, back in the isolation of his cell, he understood a fundamental truth about Pelican Bay. Strength alone would not ensure survival. Intelligence, patience, and sometimes ruthless cunning were the only currency that mattered. In the shadows, alliances were forming, and the seeds of future conflicts were planted. The razor wire wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a constant reminder of the unseen pressures that shaped every choice. For the outlaw, the lesson was clear. Every man here is both predator and prey, and survival is not given. It must be earned again and again. The yard had tested him, and he had survived. But this was only the beginning. For every victory, there would be a price. And in a place designed to crush men, the outlaw would need to navigate fear, betrayal, and power with every ounce of cunning he possessed. Because in Pelican Bay, survival is a story written in blood and shadow, and only the cleverest, strongest, and most ruthless endure. In Pelican Bay, trust is a dangerous luxury, and betrayal is as inevitable as the sunrise. For the man they called the outlaw, surviving a yard battle had earned him a grudging respect, but respect alone couldn't shield him in the SHU. Here, alliances are fragile, whispers carry more power than a fist, and a single misstep can turn even the strongest man into prey. It all started so subtly. A note slipped under his cell door. Unsigned, but the words were precise. At first, it seemed harmless, a piece of advice, a warning, a hint of camaraderie. But in a place like Pelican Bay, even the smallest gestures are loaded with hidden meaning. Every line, every word, every pause is a calculated message. And the outlaw, a man trained to read people on the streets, sensed a dangerous undercurrent. Days turned into weeks, and the messages kept coming. But the tone began to shift. It became a slow drip of subtle manipulations, veiled threats, and information about rival inmates. The intel seemed useful, but it always carried a hidden agenda. Someone was trying to shape his decisions, control his actions, and warp his perceptions. In a place where isolation twists the mind and paranoia becomes a basic survival instinct, the outlaw understood perfectly. He was being set up. And then, it happened. During one of the rare communal moments, a brief yard period for the SHU inmates, an ally he had started to trust made his move. It wasn't with fists, but with a cold, calculated betrayal. A carefully planned ambush, set in motion by whispered warnings that sent rival inmates straight for him. In that moment, survival became a brutal fight for his life. It was a harsh reminder that in Pelican Bay, the enemy isn't just outside your cell. Often, they're inside it, hiding behind words of loyalty that only exist on paper. The outlaw fought back, not just with his body but with his mind. He catalogued every detail, every whisper, every shadow that flickered in the corner of his eye. The instincts that had kept him alive for years on the streets roared back to life. He started to turn the game against those who thought they could control him. Pelican Bay had forged a crucible of fear and manipulation, but he realized something crucial. The very skills that had made him a survivor on the outside, observation, strategy, and patience, were the same skills that could save him inside these walls. But the cost was immense. Trust, once shattered in a place like this, is almost impossible to rebuild. Relationships became transactions, and alliances were temporary and conditional. Every interaction was a negotiation, every word a test. The outlaw learned to smile while his mind was planning, to nod while he was calculating, and to endure while he was plotting his next move. In Pelican Bay, the mind becomes both your shield and your weapon, and every decision carries consequences that echo far beyond the present moment. This betrayal pulled back the curtain on the prisoner's invisible networks. The secret channels information flows through, the brutal ways loyalties are tested, and how power is claimed without a single public declaration. He realized that every man in the SHU is constantly balancing a trifecta of fear, respect, and ambition. Survival often means exploiting the very systems designed to contain you. And in this cold calculus of human behavior, the strongest aren't always the ones with the most muscle. They're the ones who can read the shadows, anticipate the moves of others, and act without a moment's hesitation. By the end of the week, the outlaw had adapted. He had learned to navigate the treacherous currents of manipulation and betrayal. He had survived an ambush, turned enemies into temporary allies, and reinforced the unspoken rules that govern life inside Pelican Bay. And yet, the experience left a permanent mark, a constant reminder that even the cleverest man must remain vigilant at all times. Because in a place built to crush the human spirit, the price of overconfidence is often death. Betrayal is the currency of survival here, and every man pays it sooner or later. For the outlaw, it was a brutal lesson in vigilance, patience, and the harsh reality that trust is earned in drops but tested in torrents. Pelican Bay had revealed its darkest secret, that isolation, fear, and manipulation are far more dangerous than any fist, blade, or weapon. For the men who live here, understanding this isn't optional, it's essential. The razor wire may define the physical boundaries of the prison, but it's the invisible lines of loyalty, fear, and cunning that truly define life inside. And the outlaw, having survived his first true test of trust and treachery, was just beginning to understand what it really means to live behind these walls. But peace, even a tense one, never lasts long. The yard, calm in the early morning, suddenly shifted. A tension that had been simmering just beneath the surface for weeks finally boiled over. The air itself seemed to crackle with electricity, every inmate sensing that a storm was about to break. For the guards, it was just another day. But for the men inside, the yard was about to become a battlefield. It began with a single argument, a sharp word exchanged between two rival gangs over a piece of territory that, to any outsider, would seem insignificant. But in Pelican Bay, territory isn't just about space. It's about respect, survival, and power. One slight misstep, one glance that lingered too long, and the fragile equilibrium shattered into a million pieces. Within seconds, the argument exploded. Voices rose into shouts, shoves turned into pushes, and then fists began to fly. The sound of impact echoed across the yard, a chilling rhythm that only a place like Pelican Bay could produce. Men who had spent years mastering self-control now acted on raw, primal instinct. The outlaw, no stranger to conflict, moved through the chaos with a deliberate, deadly precision. Every step was calculated, every glance measured. He avoided the reckless punches and impulsive attacks of others, focusing instead on the men whose actions could either threaten his survival or present a new opportunity. He had learned in the SHU that chaos is both an enemy and an ally, a tool to be wielded with extreme care. Yet even for him, the brawl was intense. One rival, fueled by a bruised reputation and deep-seated resentment, lunged at him with a weapon fashioned from a shard of metal. The outlaw dodged just in time, countering with a sharp, decisive strike that neutralized the threat without drawing unnecessary attention from the guards. All around him, men fought with a primal intensity, fists, improvised weapons, and sheer force of will colliding in a brutal storm of survival instincts. But the fight had its own momentum, and momentum in Pelican Bay is a force of nature. Alliances formed and dissolved in mere seconds, as split-second decisions made under extreme pressure determined who lived, who fled, and who would face serious injury. Amid the violence, the outlaw noticed the subtle shifts, a quick glance here, a slight gesture there, that revealed hidden alliances and unfolding betrayals. He capitalized on these insights, moving strategically to protect himself and, when necessary, neutralize threats before they could fully form. In a place where the strongest don't always survive, it was his perception and cunning that became his greatest weapons. The brawl eventually subsided, not because the anger had diminished, but because the guards finally reasserted control, separating the combatants and restoring a fragile, temporary order. But the aftermath left scars, not just bruised bodies and broken pride, but a heightened sense of danger that would linger in the yard for weeks to come. Men who had been allies now eyed each other with deep suspicion. Rivals had solidified grudges that would never be forgotten. For the outlaw, the fight was more than just physical. He had survived, yes, but in doing so, he had also cemented his place in the prison's complex social hierarchy, a precarious balance of respect, fear, and caution. Every man had learned something that day. The yard is not just a place for exercise. It is a crucible where survival is earned through intelligence, speed, and ruthless decision-making. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long, dark shadows over the concrete expanse, the outlaw returned to his cell. He knew that in Pelican Bay, every day is a test, every encounter is a lesson, and every choice is a risk. The razor wire outside might confine the body, but it was the yard and the SHU that confined the mind, a relentless, crushing reminder that survival is a story written in blood, cunning, and endurance. This was Pelican Bay in its purest form, brutal, unforgiving, and alive with danger. For the outlaw, this battle had been won, but the war, as always, was far from over. Victory in the yard came at a steep cost. Every punch thrown, every glance exchanged, every split-second decision left invisible marks on his mind, scars that no steel door could ever contain. Pelican Bay was teaching him a truth that few outsiders could ever understand. Survival is not just physical, it is mental, and the war inside the mind never, ever ends. The day after the fight, the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. The rival who had lunged at him with the makeshift weapon did not forget. In Pelican Bay, grudges are measured in patience, and vengeance is planned with meticulous, chilling detail. The outlaw knew this. He had seen it countless times on the streets, but here, it was magnified by the suffocating isolation, the oppressive environment, and the razor-thin margin between life and death. Inside the SHU, the mind becomes a weapon. Every sound is amplified: the clanging of doors, the scraping of metal, the faint whispers carried through the walls. Every shadow takes on life. The outlaw spent hours replaying the fight, analyzing every gesture, timing, and position. He catalogued every potential threat, every rival's weakness, and every ally's loyalty. In Pelican Bay, paranoia is survival, and observation is the difference between life and death. But the mental strain is relentless. Sleep comes fitfully, broken by the sound of distant shouts or the routine footsteps of guards. The isolation presses against him, and even the strongest men begin to feel the slow erosion of control. Memories of past crimes, past betrayals, and past mistakes rise up unbidden, merging with the constant threat of violence to create a pressure that few could endure without breaking. The outlaw's rival, a calculating man known as Steel, began sending subtle messages, small provocations, gestures, veiled threats delivered through the tiniest details of the yard's routine. Every movement was a test, every glance a challenge. The outlaw recognized the pattern. Steel was trying to unnerve him, to provoke a reaction that would reveal a weakness. And the outlaw, having survived both street life and prison violence, knew the stakes. He could not afford to react without strategy. What began as minor psychological games escalated quickly. Steel manipulated other inmates, spreading whispers and sowing distrust. The outlaw, in turn, began his own subtle countermeasures: misdirection, controlled displays of strength, and carefully chosen alliances. Every interaction became a test of perception, a calculated dance where one false move could spark a deadly confrontation. This is the invisible war of Pelican Bay. While the yard may erupt into violence, the SHU and the spaces between interactions are where the deadliest battles are fought, inside the mind. Here, fear is both weapon and shield, and patience is more lethal than brute force. For the outlaw, understanding this was crucial. The razor wire may confine his body, but the game is in the mind, and every man in this prison is a strategist, whether he knows it or not. By the end of the week, the tension had reached a boiling point. The outlaw and Steel circled each other like predators, each waiting for the other to make the first mistake. Every step in the yard, every interaction with other inmates, every exchange with guards became part of a larger chessboard. And in Pelican Bay, losing a single move can mean more than embarrassment. It can mean death. The outlaw realized something fundamental. In this prison, the most dangerous enemies are not always the men with fists or weapons. They are the ones who can manipulate perception, exploit fear, and turn trust into a weapon. And Steel was proving himself to be one of the most dangerous men he had ever encountered. As night fell, the outlaw returned to his cell, exhaustion weighing on him. Yet, despite the physical and psychological toll, he felt a grim satisfaction. He had survived the brawl, navigated betrayal, and begun to play the mind games that were essential to his survival. But he also understood the brutal truth. In Pelican Bay, the war never stops. And with Steel waiting, the next move could come at any moment. By the time the 10th day rolled around, Pelican Bay felt different. The air was heavier. Conversations in the yard were quieter. Even the guards, who had seen every imaginable form of violence, watched the outlaw and Steel with a trace of unease. They sensed it, the slow approach of something dangerous, something calculated, something inevitable. The outlaw knew Steel wasn't just another inmate looking for dominance. Steel was a planner, a strategist molded by years inside some of the harshest prisons in America. He had survived by being 2 steps ahead of everyone else. And when men like Steel decide someone is a threat, they don't attack recklessly, they engineer chaos. The first sign came in the form of a whisper, not from a friend, but from someone who normally avoided getting involved, a silent, wiry man known only as Ghost. Ghost rarely spoke. Some inmates said he hadn't uttered more than 10 words in the last year. But on that morning, as the outlaw was being escorted to the yard, Ghost leaned close enough for his words to be felt more than heard. They removing pieces, not all of them are his. It was a cryptic warning, but in Pelican Bay, even a muttered phrase can mean the difference between life and death. The outlaw replayed Ghost's words over and over as he stepped into the yard. Steel was already there, sitting on a bench, his posture calm and unreadable, as if he were waiting for a bus rather than planning a confrontation that could end in blood. Nothing happened on the surface. No signals. No confrontations. The outlaw scanned the yard and noticed faces he didn't recognize, inmates from different blocks who had no reason to be there at that time. One of them kept staring at him. Another kept glancing at Steel. A third avoided eye contact altogether. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't trained to see danger coming, but the outlaw saw it. This wasn't an ambush. It was reconnaissance. Someone was gathering information on him, on how he moved, who he spoke to, what guards were near him, when he seemed distracted. This was preparation for something bigger, something that could happen at any time. Steel wasn't rushing. He was designing. The outlaw controlled his breathing, refusing to show fear or uncertainty. In Pelican Bay, panic is blood in the water. He walked the yard normally, interacted with the same people he usually did, and avoided looking directly at Steel. But inside, his mind raced, sifting through possibilities, alliances, and escape routes. If Steel was setting him up, he needed to understand the full picture, and fast. Then came the test. While walking along the far edge of the yard, the outlaw noticed something out of place, a small object on the ground. Metal. Sharp. A weapon. But it wasn't pointed at him. It wasn't hidden in a shoe or slipped into a rival's hand. No, this was deliberate. Placed where only he would find it, where a guard could easily spot him stopping to pick it up. It was bait. In Pelican Bay, being caught with a weapon isn't just another charge. It can send you deeper into the SHU, cut off communication, strip you of what few privileges you have, and, most importantly, make you vulnerable. Vulnerable to men like Steel. The outlaw didn't break stride. He walked past the weapon as if it were a piece of trash on the ground. But inside, he understood the message. Steel wasn't trying to kill him yet. He was trying to isolate him, to make the system do the dirty work. Later, when the outlaw returned to his cell, another surprise waited. A note, slipped under the door with surgical precision. Notes in Pelican Bay are rare. Risky. Dangerous. He opened it carefully, expecting some kind of coded threat. But the message was shockingly simple. You're playing checkers. He's playing chess. No signature. No handwriting he recognized. Someone was warning him, or manipulating him. In this prison, the line between help and deception is razor thin. The outlaw's heartbeat quickened. Steel wasn't acting alone. Someone else, maybe multiple people, were involved. Allies. Informants. Neutral parties nudged into the game? The outlaw didn't know. But what he did know was this: the setup wasn't over. The mind games weren't over. The escalation was just beginning. And as night fell, as the cell block went quiet except for distant yelling and the hum of fluorescent lights, the outlaw realized something chilling. Steel wasn't trying to destroy him in the open. Steel was rearranging the entire environment around him, turning the prison itself into a weapon. In the end, Pelican Bay isn't just a prison. It's a world built from concrete, silence, and fear. A place where every movement is watched, every decision judged, and every mistake remembered. Behind that razor wire, men become ghosts, some by choice, some by force, and some because the system grinds them down until there's nothing left to crush. The outlaw walked into Pelican Bay thinking he understood violence, loyalty, and survival. But what he learned inside those walls was something far darker, something the outside world will never fully grasp. He learned that the most dangerous fights aren't fought in the yard. They're fought in the mind, in the isolation of the SHU, in the shadows of alliances, and in the quiet moments when a man realizes he's not just battling enemies, but the system, the environment, and himself. He learned that betrayal doesn't always come in the form of a knife. Sometimes it's a whisper, a setup, a weapon planted where a guard can find it, a trap designed not to kill the body, but to break the spirit. He learned that every inmate is a strategist, every guard a wildcard, and every day is another game of survival with no scoreboard, just consequences. But he also learned something else, something the system never intended for him to learn. That even in a place built to strip you of everything, the will to survive can sharpen into something unstoppable. The outlaw refused to break. He refused to be manipulated. He refused to let Pelican Bay reshape him into another statistic lost behind the razor wire. Steel tried to isolate him. Ghost tried to warn him. The alliances tried to pull him in every direction. And the outlaw. He stood his ground. He survived the fights, survived the mind games, survived the setup. And in a prison where survival is the only currency that matters, he became something more than a target. He became a reminder. A reminder that even inside the most feared supermax prison in America, even surrounded by darkness, violence, and the weight of 1,000 silent battles, a man can hold on to the last piece of himself that the world tried to take. This is life behind the razor wire. A place where stories don't end cleanly, where justice has sharp edges, and where every inmate carries a secret the world will never hear unless someone is willing to tell it. And now, you've heard one. If you want more stories from the other side of the razor wire, where truth is darker than fiction, where every inmate has a past and every past has a price, then you know what to do. Stay curious. Stay aware. And remember, what you've seen here today is only a glimpse. Pelican Bay still holds thousands of stories in its shadows. And this was just one of them. Thanks for watching.